Often people have heard about the experience of consciousness, and they see meditation as a vehicle, as an undertaking, as a journey towards the experience of consciousness. The problem is that the mind, it's a one-way street. Consciousness has access to the human mind. And by human mind, I mean the perceptions, the mentations. So the thoughts, the perceptions, the feelings. So consciousness has access to the thoughts, the perceptions, the feelings, but the feelings don't have access to consciousness. So that any attempt to manipulate the feelings or to use the feelings, as a means to access, as a vehicle towards the experience of consciousness is at some point doomed to fail. So in this meditation technique, we say, okay, consciousness is the unknown direction. Wherever direction you try to take from the mind, the outwards that is going to be taking you away from consciousness. Any thought, any bodily sensations, any external perception. So how do I move towards consciousness? And we have to understand that consciousness is, if something appears, in a sense it's because consciousness wills it. It's because consciousness says yes to it, because if consciousness says no to anything, the thing simply doesn't appear. In that sense, consciousness is universal yes saying. So, and we are this consciousness. So if we welcome everything that appears from moment to moment, thoughts, bodily sensations, sense perceptions, with benevolence, without trying to fight it, without trying to change it, to transform it, but also with indifference, because consciousness is not attached to whatever appears, because it lets it go from moment to moment so that the renewal of life, of movement can take place. So this position of welcoming with benevolent acceptance, but indifference, benevolent indifference, unknowingly. By doing so, which is doing nothing really, by doing so, we take our stand as consciousness.
Okay, Francis, welcome to the show. To get started, I'm just going to dive in with a big one here. What would you say is the ultimate purpose of human life?
Is to know our true nature, to know what we really are experientially, and to enjoy our true nature, to celebrate it through the world, through the body, through the mind, which are then, at that moment, mere instruments of celebration.
Interesting. And when you say it's to know our true nature, what is our true nature?
Whatever it is which is hearing my words right now is obviously what you are. In other words, these words are not being heard by anything or anybody else than you.
Okay. What does the word happiness mean to you?
Our natural condition, it means for me what it means for everybody. We all know happiness. We all have experienced it, albeit for most people, fleetingly. Okay. And could be said also that the goal of life is to establish oneself permanently in this natural condition. Because happiness is our natural condition. In the absence of what I call ignorance, which doesn't mean not to be able to make an addition or to know how to speak. No, ignorance in a very specific sense means ignorance of what we truly are, of our true nature.
So becoming aware of our true nature and living with that awareness is going to naturally lead to happiness, because happiness is our natural state.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Happiness could be described as the experience of our true nature knowing itself directly by itself. So it's not an intellectual, conceptual type of knowledge. It is an experiential knowledge which has the taste, if you will, or the perfume of happiness. And this perfume, actually, this fragrance come in various different categories: love, intelligence, beauty. But they are all closely related. For instance, you cannot experience love without intelligence. You cannot experience beauty without loving beauty, etc. And you cannot experience truth, love, happiness without being happy. A truth, love, beauty without being happy at the same time.
And how has your internal experience of life been different before and after you came to this realization? What was life like for you before you came to the understanding that you currently have of consciousness and reality? And what's it like now? And I know that's going to vary from day to day, but generally speaking.
Suffering. It was intense suffering, which reached, I was in my late 20s, and I had kind of checked all the boxes I was supposed to be checking to be happy. Very good education, very good career ahead of me, wife, a child, good health, a house, 2 cars in the driveway, and I was young. And at some point, got divorced, separated, I was alone, I was sick with hepatitis. It was winter. And I realized my job was a nightmare. My life was a nightmare. And so I realized that all the recipes for happiness that had been handed down to me by society, my parents, they simply were not working. And that triggered the beginning of a search. And I became interested in finding happiness elsewhere. And I discovered a book by Krishnamurti during a stopover in Paris in a business trip. And that was the first time I was being interested in a book, really interested in a book about philosophy. Although, I had translated Plato and others in my earlier years. But that was really something. And so that triggers my search And I met my teacher 2 years later, and that was it. And to answer the second part of your question, it's like awakening from a nightmare. Not awakening, instantaneously, but, like the nightmare, kind of all the monsters fade away, and then the sun rises and there's a beautiful landscape.
So I've heard you call these things that we chase in life, these things that we think are going to make us happy, whether it's the great marriage, the family, the career, the nice house. You call these recipes for happiness. And what you're sort of saying here is that these ultimately are not going to lead to fulfillment. They're not going to lead to contentment, not for everybody. And whenever you do realize that, you have to look elsewhere. And these things are all external things. And it seems that then the answer is by turning your attention inwards and getting to know your true nature, you might say. And then that is what ultimately leads to this happiness.
No, I'm not. My recommendation is not to have a companion, not to have children, not to and to go to a monastery or a cave. No, not at all. No. It's about living our human life. Having a job, having companions, friends. But knowing ultimately that these are the way the universe brings love, beauty, intelligence to us. But if we have not discovered the inner peace, our relationship won't be harmonious. We won't be able to enjoy the beauty of the world. We become jaded. And the impending doom of fear of death will be our companion throughout our life. It's going to be the party pooper in everything we do, in everything we experience.
I've heard you say that the precondition for most psychological suffering is the belief that we are a separate entity. Can you maybe expand on this and why this might be at the root cause of much of the unnecessary suffering that we experience?
I think it's a question we each have to ask from ourselves. You shouldn't believe me, my statement, without verifying it or falsifying it based upon your own experience. But my contention is this, and you can verify it for yourself. Every time, without any exception, when we experience psychological suffering, we can verify that we wouldn't do so unless we believed at that moment to be a separate person, a limited person, a separate entity. Let's take an example. You have a breakup. You suffer. Someone has left you. He or she wanted to leave. You didn't want her or him to leave. You suffer. Change the picture to one in which the same thing happened, but you don't believe to be a separate entity. In other words, you are open to the possibility that the consciousness in you and the consciousness in the other is the same. That you share the same reality. So you are neither the one you believe to be, and he, she is not either the one you believed him, her to be. You are both, and neither. You are the reality of both. Everything that happens in the world, including this breakup, is a cosmic event originating from this reality which is yours. There is nobody here or there to be left or to leave. This picture is very, very different. You are not left alone to die in the cold of starvation and eaten away by the wolves.
This is I think this is something that is easy to grasp intellectually, maybe. But whenever that happens, whenever that breakup happens, this is very difficult to, I suppose, to integrate into your understanding, but it's worth practicing, you know?
Yes, no, but I'm not saying that a breakup is often also then the same person who was miserable at the time of the breakup, 10 years later, how does he or she look back at the breakup? In most cases, they'll be happy that it happened. Because they understood that a relationship in which one of the partners is not happy, the other partners is fooling himself, believing that he was happy. Because if there is true love, how can I be happy when my partner is not happy in the relationship? You see, if there is true love. When there is attachment and instrumentalization of the others, that's different, of course. I miss this instrument that was necessary for my happiness, or I missed the comfort or the companionship or the physical health or but the love. So love is something different. There is love only if both wants to be together and look forward to be reunited when they are separate, and all these things that we know well. That there is a reunion of the hearts that remains.
Whenever, when I look back on the events of my life, almost always the really difficult ones, the really difficult experiences, the really negative experiences have been the ones that have been most formative, have been most
Exactly.
beneficial. But,
Exactly.
I know that, and I know that now even. But even when I'm going through a negative experience now, it's very difficult to remember that in the moment as it's happening, But I think it's just something worth coming to mind. But I was going to ask you, what's your view on negative emotion? I've heard you use a metaphor of surfers relishing the big wave. Does this ring a bell for you?
Yeah, but emotions means the body emotion. So emotions, negative emotions is a type, a category of bodily sensations that have usually their origin in a thought. And for instance, a frustration, anger. The thought is, how did he dare do that to me? How did he or she dare say that to me? And that triggers anger, and then the patterns of aggression and defense that are genetically inherited are set in motion. And then comes the bodily sensations. But at the origin, there was the thought of me. There was ignorance, as I defined it earlier. Ignorance being the belief that this consciousness of ours is dependent upon the body, is private, is limited, is mortal. That's the crux of the matter. And all the negative emotions, low self-esteem, etc., although they manifest in the form of bodily sensation, they have a common origin, which is the sense of being a limited and separated me. So, to watch the emotion, hoping that by doing so, we are going to control the movement, it's too late. The train has already left the station the moment we indulged in the thought of me. How did he dare do that to me? Now, there is something else. Once we have investigated the nature of self, and we have become interested in this investigation, it becomes clear to us at some point that we have no valid reason to believe, no valid reason whatsoever, to believe that this seemingly ordinary consciousness, which is hearing my words right now, is dependent upon this body, that it is separate and limited, that it is not universal, shared by all, real, and the reality of everything that is. We have no reason, no valid reason to believe otherwise, no experiential proof. Then we become open to the alternate possibility, to this possibility that, that universal, the universality of consciousness. Then, and only then, when these all mechanisms of reaction take place, instead of blaming ourselves, I went back into ignorance, I got angry at this person. No, because we know already we had been in ignorance. The moment we know that, we are no longer in ignorance. But there is still this wave of energy in the body, in motion. And then there is a technique. That's a technique, is from the tantric tradition. Then this emotion, this wave, we can surf it. And it takes us to the shore of our true nature, to the stillness, to the silence. As the body itself goes back to its natural condition, the mind goes back to stillness. Everything recovers the harmony. It's beautiful. What is counterproductive in these cases of negative emotions is to judge oneself, to say, I got angry again. I got jealous again. I got envious again. I got self-judging again, or judging others again. No, because the moment I am aware of it, I'm out of it. That's the beauty.
Beautiful. Okay. What would you say the essence of meditation is?
The essence of meditation, on the one hand, from the absolute point of view, all beings, because we are all the same consciousness, we are in perfect meditation at all times. We are meditation itself. Consciousness is meditation. But there is another definition of meditation, which could be defined as being knowingly meditation. And the definition is this: we are in meditation the moment we don't believe or feel to be a separate entity. The moment we don't believe to be this human body or feel to be this human body. Or we don't believe to be this separate human mind.
I like that. And I heard you say something, I'm just going to read it out here, about this. So when we let things happen without interfering unknowingly, we take our stand as consciousness. And the other part of that was consciousness says yes to everything. Can you maybe expand on those statements?
Yes. You see, often people have heard about the experience of consciousness, and they see meditation as a vehicle, as an undertaking, as a journey towards the experience of consciousness. The problem is that the mind has no access to consciousness. It's a one-way street. Consciousness has access to the human mind. And by human mind, I mean the perceptions, the mentations. So the thoughts, the perceptions, the feelings. So consciousness has access to the thoughts, the perceptions, the feelings, but the feelings don't have access to consciousness. So that any attempt to manipulate the feelings or to use the feelings, as a means to access, as a vehicle towards the experience of consciousness, is at some point doomed to fail. So, in this meditation technique, we say, okay, consciousness is the unknown direction. wherever direction you try to take from the mind, the outwards, that is going to be taking you away from consciousness. Any thought, any bodily sensations, any external perception. So, how do I move towards consciousness? And we have to understand that consciousness is, if something appears, in a sense it becomes, it's because consciousness wills it. It's because consciousness says yes to it, because if consciousness says no to anything, the thing simply doesn't appear. That's, in that sense, consciousness is universal yes saying. So, and we are this consciousness. So if we welcome everything that appears, from moment to moment, thoughts, bodily sensations, sense perceptions, with benevolence, without trying to fight it, without trying to change it, to transform it, but also with indifference, because consciousness is not attached to whatever appears, because it lets it go from moment to moment, so that the renewal of life, of movement, can take place. So this position of welcoming with benevolent acceptance, but indifference, benevolent indifference, unknowingly, by doing so, which is doing nothing really, by doing so, we take our stand as consciousness, you see? Mm. The moment, in other words, the moment we don't try to fix it, we realize it wasn't broken.
I love it. And it reminds me of another thing. You've got quite a few quotes, Francis, that stick in the mind quite well. One is, effortful activity or effort can never lead to the effortless state. And exactly. This is related here as well.
Yeah.
Do you know, I find, say if I am meditating, I find that for most of it, my mind is going at 100 miles per hour. But there is one question I do find, it's sort of like a prompt, but it helps me to get into a more present state, even for a few seconds. And it's, let me see if I got it here. It's like, what is here now if there is no problem to solve? What is here now if there is no problem to solve? That's the question I ask myself. And when I ask myself that, it leads to like a few moments of presence temporarily, So I was wondering, have you found any questions to ask yourself in your own practice or with I know you don't call your students with your friends, for example. Any questions you find helpful in that regard, or is it just letting it all be?
For me, I had to accept at some point that I am consciousness rather than the body or the mind. You see, if let's assume that consciousness is independent from the body and the mind. That it has its own existence. Let's assume that is the case. And I am asking you the question, okay, in this case, would you say, I am the body, I'm the mind, or I am consciousness?
I am consciousness.
Yes, then it becomes obvious. Yeah, but then the objection is, yes, but unfortunately, I believe that this consciousness is very much dependent upon the body and the mind. But it is very important to make this first determination, you see. If, by any chance, it were the case that consciousness is a reality of its own, independent from the body and from the mind, what would I be from my own experience? And then the answer comes, yes, I'm conscious, because I'm always with consciousness. The body is not always with consciousness. So if consciousness and the body were to be independent, then what happens during my dreams? My body is not present, but my consciousness is present, and because they are completely two different realities. Now, I'm not my body because I'm consciousness, and consciousness is not my body. You see? So this first determination, also what I'm saying seems to be childish, is not childish at all. It is our heart who is speaking the truth. I am consciousness. And then, however, a remaining question requires an answer. And the remaining question is consciousness dependent upon the body and on the mind? You see? And because most people believe that to be the case. So that's the investigation then. That's the investigation that begins. It is a review, a revisiting of all the evidence we believe to have that consciousness is dependent upon the body and the mind. All the experiential evidence we believe to have. And by consciousness, I don't mean the content of mind. I don't mean the thoughts, the perceptions. Of course, what I hear is dependent on the quality of the good functioning of my ears. That's not in contention here. What you are talking about is that which truly perceives at the end of the chain of perception. What we call I is the reality that perceives consciousness. So, and there is something that can, once understood, bring almost instantaneously clarity to this question. It is this: nothing that appears in consciousness phenomenally can give me any valid information about the consciousness in which or to which it appears. And the metaphor I use for that is the following. Let's assume you have a photographer, right? And you see the pictures taken by this photographer. And these pictures, this photographer is photographing plants, for instance, or landscapes. And do you know, looking at this picture, what do you know about the photographer himself? Do you know whether it's a man, a woman? What's their size? What's the color of their eyes? What's the color of their hair? Their age? Perhaps you could know, some elements. But in the case of consciousness, nothing that appears in consciousness tells you anything about the consciousness in which it appears. In particular, because it tells you anything about the consciousness, it doesn't tell you that the consciousness is limited, that it was born, and it doesn't tell you that it is dependent upon the body. If that which I've just said is meditated upon, meaning by meditated upon, meaning we think about it, at some point, yes, it's a revolution because we have been conditioned by society, by the prevalent view that consciousness is dependent upon the body. Doesn't make it true. Truth is not a democracy. Before Einstein in 1905, everybody in the scientific community believed that time and space are independent. So only one man came and said, oh, no. But in this case, because scientists they have this humility for the facts. Pretty soon thereafter, everybody was convinced Einstein was right. Here it's very different. Very different.
Einstein was a physicist, and I've heard you say that the people closest to reality, the hard sciences, maybe physics, maths, they're the people that are most humble about our situation in reality. And the further you go out into softer sciences, then people become increasingly materialist. Why do you think that might be the case?
No, it's not what it's not really what I said. What I said is this. The view of reality since Newton and the view that was prevalent in the 19th century was a very materialist one. In other words, reality was envisioned as being made of solid building blocks that were related to each other by laws of motion. And this view of the world, everything was about matter. And was prevalent in the philosophy, Marxism, dialectical materialism, etc. And is since then prevalent in all the soft sciences, in political science, in psychology, neurology, etc. However, physics has evolved a lot since. And physicists know better that they know very little about matter, and that certainly the models of matter they use are very different from the one I was mentioning. Matter has dematerialized itself in the eyes of the physicist, if you will. The notion of a solid particle has been replaced by first the duality of wave particles with quantum mechanics, and then has moved to the notion of field. So there is a field is not localized, is not. So this notion of localization itself, for instance, even if we assume that consciousness is a byproduct of this body, but this body made of matter, but the matter this body is made of, all these quarks and gluons is is not really localized. It is a dance of various fields interacting with each other like waves in the ocean. And they are connection at great distance, entanglements. So whatever is produced here, like a thought, a decision, whatever, or a consciousness, the reality of it is not local. That's the point. The reality of an apparently local consciousness is not here. So if we define consciousness as a reality which is hearing these words right now, even according to this model, it loses its locality.
This reminds me of something else. Another thing that you said that I find quite interesting was that every thought you have is a cosmic event.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Even if we follow this model, every thought we have is a cosmic event. A French physicist, Bernard d'Espagna, wrote a book, Quantum Theory. And I mean, it's a book which is not really for, you need some math to read it. But in this book, he asks himself, what are the implications of philosophy? What are the implications of quantum theory on philosophical ideas? Just as, for instance, before Galileo and before Copernicus, there were religious ideas about, the earth being at the center, right, and everything revolving around us. So these religious or philosophical ideas have been debunked by science. So that may still be the case, that we have some ideas that we take for granted that have been debunked by modern physics. And Bernard d'Espagna says, yes, there is one thing which has been debunked. He calls it atomistic realism. And atomistic realism is a theory according to which reality, the world and us, if we, in this perspective, is made of atoms, right, of separate parts, interacting with each other, yes, according to some laws, but they can be considered to be separate reality. And that is precisely what quantum theories disagree with. In other words, it's a case where the totality of reality is more than the sum of its parts. The totality of reality is more. You cannot understand reality as the sum of its independent parts. That's very important. It has to be taken as a whole. And I mean, it's definitely the usual materialist view is part of this atomistic realism. But these are considerations for academics.
For sure. So we've spoke a lot about consciousness and reality in this conversation. I'm curious to get your thoughts, because you've probably spent a lifetime thinking about this and interacting with it. But how would you describe the nature of that consciousness? And another question that comes to mind is, to what extent can we actually access like reality, with our five senses? Like, how limited is our view of reality itself?
When I use the word reality first, it's I would say that philosophically it's incorrect. I should use the word rather the word being, meaning that which is. You see, that which is. We all have this intuition that there is something rather than nothing. Right? And even if there was only consciousness without any perceptions, that would be already something. Right? In other words, we have the intuition of being. And then if we ask ourselves, what is the connection, the relationship between being, which I call reality, and consciousness? Of course, since consciousness is already something, consciousness exists, so consciousness depends on being. Consciousness has being. On the other hand, experientially, we cannot have being without consciousness, experientially. So experientially, they are kind of two sides of the same coin. And now, if we ask ourselves, what is it that I can be absolutely certain of, besides that there is something rather than nothing and that there is consciousness? Is there anything that I could be absolutely certain of? I'm looking at my computer here. Can I be absolutely certain that there is a computer in front of me? No, because in this moment I could be dreaming a sort of dream. Upon waking up, I would realize this computer was an illusion. But this dream was something rather than nothing, and my consciousness of it was beyond the doubt and is beyond the doubt. You see? So, in fact, the only certainty we can have is this one. Being, or which I call reality, and consciousness. And the question then becomes, can we live our life solely from this certainty? Can we accept the uncertainty of everything else? And the answer is yes. The answer is not that our problem is that we don't know enough. Our problem is that we know too much, especially certitudes that make us miserable and that are not supported by evidence, that we could easily dispose of, like the certitude of being a separate person, of being a mortal consciousness that creates this sense of doom throughout our life. It's not necessary. Do you know when you began? You don't. Nobody does. And if you don't know that you began, do you know that you will end? You don't. Nobody does. But every time we are afraid, it's because we have chosen this belief. We have lost the art of living in not knowing. Which is the art of creativity, the art of living in the moment, the art of truth, of love, of beauty.
This is fascinating. What comes to mind for me is, so the majority of people in this world, they're born into a culture, and the mainstream view is that consciousness is localized in the body, and we are, what Alan Watts would say, we feel ourselves to be a skin encapsulated ego. And
Yeah.
that's how we feel ourselves to be in the world. Are you hopeful that your view of consciousness, your worldview, how you feel in the world, could become the default state for humanity?
No. No. What do I know? Of course, we live our life in the world as if it mattered. But the art of living is to live our life as if it mattered, knowing that ultimately it doesn't. If you play a tennis match, and while playing a point, if you become afraid of the outcome of this point, because all of a sudden you believe it matters, you're going to lose the point. You have to be either too cautious or you're going to take too much risks. The fine line is when you play the point as if it mattered, but ultimately knowing that it doesn't. So that's the quality of the great champions, They are daring and at the same time detached. And they don't give much to the opponent, you see, so they fight. So that's a lesson for life, to live our life as if it mattered. In other words, compassion, intelligence, to live our life as we would share the same consciousness with all beings. But knowing at the same time that death is at the end of this human body, is at the end of the journey, that is not going to change. Birth and death are part of the natural cycles of renewal and movement. It is this acceptance of the order of the universe and to see the beauty in it, you see. So it's like we live, there are two dimensions, if you will. There is a human dimension, and it's the game we are playing, right? And there is a cosmic dimension, a universal dimension, which is the real dimension. So to play the human dimension, knowing at the same time that the real dimension is the cosmic dimension.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on, Francis. I want to say thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed this. You've left me with a lot to think about. Have you got any retreats or anything coming up that people might be interested in learning more about, or is there a website you would send them to?
Yeah, you can find that on my website, francislucille.com. I'll be in Europe giving retreats around Christmas in Paris.
Okay. Well, Francis, thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much.